Hey all, here are OS Reviews. In this video, we're taking a quick look at the Redragon IRELIA. This is a 60% compact mechanical keyboard that not only has a really clean and minimalistic appearance, but claims to be extremely responsive for things like gaming, for example, where every millisecond counts. Magnetic adjustable switches, so you're supposedly able to change the actuation distance, whether you want kind of that rapid trigger effect or you want a slightly more normal typing experience, 2 actions, 1 key press. Certainly one of the first times I've seen something like that. And otherwise it is RGB backlit, so you're able to still see what you're looking at in the dark. So this is what the adjustability looks like. If you want the ultra fast reaction, you can actually make the switches, it seems like, a little bit more compact, lower travel distance, and that's going to be a bit more rapid for gaming, requiring less distance to bounce back on. So those keystrokes become just 0.1 millimeters, which is crazy for a mechanical keyboard. We'll have to see if the experience feels good or not, though, with something so shallow. Or you can expand it into the normal 4 millimeters for things like typing. You get more tactility as a result. The keycaps are made out of PBT, plastic, detachable USB Type-C. What I will say though is that this model is still a wired keyboard at the end of the day, which kind of makes sense because if you are looking at shaving off milliseconds for gaming responsiveness, you would probably want to plug it in via a USB cable onto your computer anyways, because there is inevitably some delay with wireless Bluetooth. So this will get you the fastest transmission of data. That being said, maybe if they had an optional Bluetooth mode for things like typing, that could be nice to consider. Other specs here include the keystrokes are guaranteed up to 100 million times of being pressed down, so they should last for an extremely long time, more so even than low-cost membrane-style keyboards with an 8,000 hertz polling rate, so again, extremely responsive. And then we have the keyboard there on top. Other quick contents include some of the user guides. And interestingly enough, the actuation distance of how far down the key switches are being pressed from, again, 4 millimeters down to 0.1 millimeters is also customized from the companion software. So actually this app becomes more important because I assumed that this was something you had to do on the hardware of the keyboard, maybe by using a switch, but no, this is all done via software control. So I guess there must be magnets inside of all the switches, and depending on the intensity of the magnet, it knows how much to release the key switches. Last but not least, you get the USB Type-C to USB Type-A cable. It is also L-shaped to provide a little bit more of a compact fit when you are using it. There's also a keycap and switch puller if you want to customize this. And inside of the smaller box here, you get some extra key switches if they ever break down. And you also have a quick diagram that tells you how they function, how to pull them out properly. And the color on the switches are pink looking. They honestly don't feel super different just by looking at it, aside from the enclosure maybe being just a touch thicker compared to a regular key switch from a mechanical keyboard, and there's not really a prong at the bottom, so a slightly different mechanism for snapping into place. But again, hidden inside here is probably where all the magic and magnets that are making the variable actuation point function. Quite interesting. And last but not least, there is also some stickers that you get from Redragon if you want to further customize the way the keyboard looks. And taking a closer look at the keyboard itself, even without the really unique key switches going on, I have to say from just a aesthetic point of view, I really like the way that this looks. It is so minimalistic and clean, almost in this retro way. It might be one of my favorite looking pre-built mechanical keyboards that I've reviewed thus far. Again, the radius of all the curves are also kind of extreme, but at the same time, the keys are large enough that it doesn't feel too difficult to correctly tap on them, but just have this beautiful, almost vintage touch going on with this black and white finish. Otherwise, 60% keyboard is, again, extremely compact. So this thing is almost just about a phone and a half in terms of length, which is why I think having Bluetooth could have been a nice extra function, making it a wireless keyboard as well for portability, but it is what it is. The build is also interesting because the top half of the frame is constructed out of metal aluminum alloy, whereas the back plate here, and also kind of transitioning into this halfway point, is then built out of polycarbonate plastic, but overall still is good enough in terms of the weight. Doesn't really flex either. The bottom features some soft touch rubber feet that provides some grip and traction on a desk so it doesn't really slide around, and 2 feet that you can use to pop it up at an elevated angle when you are typing. On the left hand edge, there's also the Type-C port for data, and that is more or less it. There are no other buttons or controls on the side. Again, since there is no way to, again, adjust the actuation point directly on the keyboard's hardware, you have to use that optional software. And removing one of the keycaps here, you can tell that this is just what it looks like. So the key switches that we saw there from earlier literally just snaps into place, and that is it. Here's a quick look at the companion software. We're able to select on specific keys that you want to add additional functions and macros to. You can even select additional keys to trigger functions, including the mouse, to move left, right, up, and down. It can simulate that, or even type in a specific text. For example, whenever it gets pressed, it will then type in hello. Other options for customization include multimedia commands. Things like search, mute, play, pause, volume, as well as brightness can all be assigned to any key on the keyboard that you like. You can even have it launch a specific application when it's pressed. For instance, a certain game, or maybe Photoshop, video editing, so on and so forth, or even the specific lighting animation for that one particular key can all be customized in terms of brightness, as well as speed if you want it to be different from all the other keys on the keyboard. Now the next tab over here allows you to change the trigger setting, aka the actuation distance of the magnetic switches. So if we tap on that button and you click on quick trigger, you'll be able to see an option pop up that says what the release actuation distance will be. And if you tap on journey of pressing and release, you're able to customize both the press as well as the release. Just for comparison, let's say I wanted to click on a second key over here and similarly customize it, but this time around, let's make it the minimum actuation distance to see how that compares with the kind of right arrow key that we set to be the maximum. And just as a side note, you are able to drag over multiple keys on the virtual keyboard here on the top, so you don't have to only type on kind of one key at a time. If you want to highlight all of the, let's say, QWERTY keys at once, you can set those to have the same actuation distance, the brightness, as well as the speed, using this RGB wheel. And for additional presets, we can tap on the row here on top. There's going to be static, as well as, again, neon color, which slowly ripples into different shades. I'll also point out that for the macros that you're assigning for different shortcuts, you can save it as different profiles. For instance, adding another profile and calling it something like multimedia or gaming, and if you access that profile in the future, it will then allow you to trigger the commands that you've saved into that specific mode. But then you can go back to the regular profile if you're just doing typing, for example. And now a closer look at the switches. Again, we've set the down arrow here to be the shortest actuation distance, and then the right arrow to be the longest actuation distance. And what's really interesting is from a visual perspective, if we're taking a look at it from the side, it actually doesn't look like the switches are physically getting lower versus taller. So I guess that's a misconception I had looking at the product images and ads there. I thought it would actually become something like this if you set it to be lower, but actually no, they still look the same from afar. It's just when you're pressing down, the sensitivity in the settings means that you don't have to press all the way to trigger that particular key. In other words, the magnet inside might be getting a little bit higher up so that you don't have to press all the way down for it to know that you are pressing on that button. And you can train your typing habits to just be a little bit more light, exerting less force if you're doing things like gaming, for example. Even though the switches themselves, again, the distance from the outside doesn't seem to change. Just to serve as an example, on this key, we can just tap very lightly, and it will then trigger that command, versus on this key, we have to press all the way down for it to register because of the actuation adjustments that we made there in the settings. Here's an example of what the backlight looks like in a darker environment. It's going to become more apparent and seems to work well enough. That being said, because of the type of plastic that they're using, if we are looking very closely, you'll see that the actual letters don't physically shine through. It'll look something like this, which is to say it's alright, but of course the letters actually shone through. That might have been even better. But at least this type of plastic is going to be more wear resistant, so if you're using it for longer stretches of time, it shouldn't really affect the way that the keycaps look. A quick look in real life of what the other effects, including neon, breathing, as well as the wave pattern there looks. This one here being the twinkle, as well as the radar, and we can also change the, again, speed of the animations as well to make them slower, almost pausing on a single frame, as well as making them faster. And you can also change the direction of movement as well. So if you want them to rotate around the other direction, you can do so. As you can tell there, that flips the direction. This one here is auto ripple, going outwards and kind of in different positions on the keyboard. This one here is called striation. It will then ripple down in different rows of the keyboard. Reactive modes like Aura will ripple outwards depending on when you're typing on the keyboard. And next one here being Ripple is another reactive mode, as you can tell, almost dueling between different colors. This one here is another one that just persists for a few seconds on the particular keys that you're typing on before going away. Again, these are fun to have as maybe a demo mode. However, if you want the best practicality of seeing the keys in a darker environment, you probably want to keep it at one of the other modes that don't really fade away after a couple of seconds, although these do look quite beautiful as you're using them. And the last one, which is musical rhythm, seems to actually not function very interestingly on the keyboard when we're selecting it. So actually take that back. There is probably no microphone built into the hardware of this particular model, and that particular setting is probably a residue from one of their other mechanical keyboard models, since I believe they're using a similar software across the board for all of their other offerings, which is perhaps something they should just remove to prevent confusion if there isn't that particular mode that can be triggered on the keyboard. Last but not least, you can also enter one of your profiles, custom modes, to only have specific keys light up for purposes like gaming, for example, that you can set up yourself. Here's also a quick typing test of what the keys sound like. So overall, it's a pretty satisfying typing experience. That being said, this is definitely not the most quiet mechanical keyboard that I've tried out. It does produce a pretty clacky sound, maybe not as loud as a blue switch, but for sure not quite as quiet as something like a brown switch. So factor that into consideration if you're in a more public space. That being said, if you're just in your room, it actually is a pretty satisfying clack in my opinion. All the keys feel consistent, including the spacebar as well is pretty well balanced, doesn't feel too loose from the edges either. So that is more or less it as far as our quick hands-on review of this K701WB 60% compact mechanical keyboard. I think the magnetic switches are probably the most unique aspect about these. It's the first time I've tried them out as an alternative to regular mechanical switches, that is. The concept of being able to change the actuation distance is quite neat if you're looking for that level of granularity. That being said, if the actual switches rose higher versus lower, that could have been even cooler, I think, from a hardware perspective. And as we talked about, this particular model lacks Bluetooth capability. In addition, the backlight here doesn't actually shine through the keys themselves. So those are some areas that could possibly be improved on in a future gen model. That being said, this is definitely a very responsive as well as an elegant mechanical keyboard from a design perspective, and for the most part makes it a good experience for doing work as well as play alike. You can check out more details if you're interested in the links down below, but for now that's been our video. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews. That's been the Redragon IRELIA. This is the K701 mechanical keyboard.